Well, the last episode of the popular TV series Game of Thrones is airing this Sunday, but fans are not only upset that their favorite show is ending, they're also angry with how things are wrapping up in Westeros. Hundreds of thousands have signed a petition to get the creators to completely remake the final season. Angry fans are calling the showrunners incompetent writers. So here's our question. Should fan input be taken into account when creating a series or a film? So let's turn now to our panel of culture experts to discuss that topic. Joining me in Toronto is Diana McCallum. She is a co-host for the Talk from Superheroes podcast. Hello to you.
Hello.
And in Montreal, we have Justine Smith. Justine is a contributor for the National Post and Cult Montreal. Hello, Justine.
Hi.
Okay, so first I'll start with you, Diana. Is this a case of fan culture gone wrong?
It's not gone wrong, but it's not gone right. I mean, the season's bad. There's no real debating that. It's not good, but I mean, people want to express they don't like it. This is kind of one of the only ways they can. I mean, I can't believe anyone actually thinks they will remake an entire season of a show, because also then, who do you want to write it? Who do you think can do it well? Like the fans themselves? There's no right answer to this. There's just kind of anger and upset that something they've watched for 8 years isn't ending well.
And Justine, what do you think? Do you think that really people should pay more attention to this fan input now? Because we know that with social media, there is so much more interaction.
I think that, of course, these films or these television shows are made for fans to a certain extent. Most people who are creating art, television, movies want people to watch it. But on the other hand, I'm not sure that making things with the fan input is a good idea. I think we've seen over history that that doesn't normally go well. And it also assumes that there's a monolith of opinions on the side of the fandom where they are going to agree on which direction the show will take. Which I think we can all agree is never going to happen and is also a little bit silly.
But we have seen fans really hold the power when it comes to certain things, and not talking about Game of Thrones, but we also saw earlier this month that the makers of Sonic the Hedgehog had to redesign his image because fans complained. So when we're talking about something like that, there is some power that they do hold. In that case, was it something that the creators should have paid attention to as they did? Diana.
I think that one particular case made a lot of sense. It's a movie where you don't have to replace an actor. It's a CG character. It's a beloved character. And they kind of just came out and they said, yeah, he doesn't look quite right. And you don't have to replace an actor. You don't have to fire anyone. You just have to spend a few more hours at the computer CGing him to look a little different. And in this case, you can make people happy without really changing an artistic vision too much. That's very different than saying remake an entire season of a show that's already been filmed. So I think there's certain times where you really can take fan input. Like, we like this character in Marvel movies, so they get more Marvel movies. Like, big overscale things I think they can really listen to when there's time to change it.
And in terms of the creative independence then, Justine, I wanted to ask you, do you think that all of this input and those strong opinions that are, Lord knows, shared quite widely online, do you think that is impeding creativity today for these producers?
I don't necessarily think it's impeding creativity. It really depends the people who are above them. I do think that more than we realize, most of the content we are watching that's made on the grand scale of something like Sonic the Hedgehog or Game of Thrones or Marvel or Star Wars is already being created with so much data that is coming from the fans and the people who are watching these movies. It might not be a directed opinion of this is what the fans are saying, but it's what statistically or what the data is telling them. They are going to be creating content that is already so informed by our likes, our dislikes, and our engagement.
And Diana, I wanted to ask you, in terms of Game of Thrones itself, I mean, certainly the fans do have a lot of power, because that is why this series has done so well. I mean, they spent millions of dollars on each and every episode, and that was a result of how much business it garnered, how much revenue it was able to garner because of how many people were watching it. So shouldn't the creators perhaps pay a little bit of attention to that?
They should pay attention to, I mean, the story they wanted to tell. We've been watching from the beginning because the creators, who've been the showrunners the whole time, made a story we liked and were compelled by. And now it's getting near the end and we're not happy anymore. But that doesn't mean we should be able to tell them how to do their jobs. We decided to trust them. What they should listen to is if people stop watching. But Game of Thrones gets more ratings every single week. They had 43 million viewers last week. It's just numbers, like Justine said. They look at the data, and people are watching Game of Thrones, so this is how they made it, and I don't think anyone at HBO is too upset about it.
I guess whether they're angry or not, they are watching. That is for certain. But we know that we've also seen sort of a flip side of this all, where fans have actually stepped in and they've saved shows because of petitions or because of their reaction. And Brooklyn Nine-Nine was one of those shows where we know it wasn't going to be produced anymore. And then there was an outcry saying, no, we want it. And so it was resurrected, so to speak. So is there a fine balance there, Justine?
I think for sure there's a balance. And again, data is imperfect, and so is fan reactions. I think that a lot of the kind of information that people are relying on, especially in television, can often be inaccurate because they're still relying often on kind of outdated modes of distribution. Most television networks are looking at Nielsen ratings, which doesn't necessarily reflect who the audiences are and actually how large it is. And there is something to be said for an audience that is dedicated and passionate versus one that's more passive. Some shows might have a higher rating than Brooklyn Nine-Nine just because they follow an incredibly popular television show, whereas the Brooklyn Nine-Nine people will tune in every week and buy the merchandise, engage with the DVDs, and be a much more loyal fan base. So of course, you have to kind of not necessarily give them what they want, but take into consideration what they're telling the creators or the company.
Now, finally, I wanted to ask both of you guys if you think that the social media engagement there is these days with different shows, whether or not that will change sort of the future of production. Because we know, for example, that Netflix now has this sort of choose your own adventure show on their Black Mirror series where it's interactive and people can decide sort of which way the plot line goes in certain cases. So do you think that that might be the future, given how vocal people now are, engaged and interactive they are with these shows via social media? We'll go to you, Diana, first, and then to you, Justine.
I mean, I think it goes back to what Justine said about data, to be totally fair. Shows will get made that get the most Twitter talk, that get the most passionate fans, that get the highest demographic of fans who are interested to advertisers and to people who buy streaming services. So it kind of just depends on how vocal they are. And I don't know about choose your own adventure, but things that are popular will get bought. Like Netflix just saved the show Lucifer because it was like Brooklyn Nine-Nine. It had a big outcrying of support, and people will go where the money is, where the viewers are. So definitely outcrying does something. It makes a change. I don't know how big a change it will make to say choose your own adventure and to how shows get made or movies get made, because at the end of the day you still create a whole movie or show and then release it. So you can't make a lot of changes depending on what fans say afterwards. But it's an interesting conversation.
And Justine?
I think that you've already seen some examples in which fans or audiences have kind of informed television. I think it tends to happen more in the level of like memes or in-jokes. The show Community that was on years ago would often take what was really popular on Twitter and kind of play jokes on it. But in terms of informing narrative in the sense of choose your own adventure or redoing the ending of Game of Thrones, I think that on a practical level, that's probably not going to happen. And it's also not as accurate for the producers of this content who are investing hundreds or of millions of dollars. They can't really rely on that versus what the data is telling them, which we've kind of spoken about. If they're going to continue to watch and if they're going to continue to engage with it, are they really doing anything wrong, even if people are unhappy with the direction of the show, if they keep watching?
A really interesting discussion. Thank you to both of you. And I guess for fans of Game of Thrones, suck it up. If you don't like what's happening, don't watch on Sunday, right?
Read the books.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you to Diana and to Justine for joining us. Diana McCallum is the co-host for the Superheroes podcast. Justine Smith is the contributor for the National Post and Cult Montreal. Thank you.